Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Outside Looking In. I'm Samson Folk, and I'm here discussing in this podcast series every single team plus the Raptors. So we get half the conversation roughly about the Raptors so that you, the listener, get to see the kind of the consensus of what people think about your team and your players. And then we talk about every other team in the league with somebody from another market who covers that team, and then you kind of get to learn about the league at large. It's Outside Looking In. Today, Bruno Passos with the Spurs. Very exciting because, I was at Summer League this season. And if you ever were going to see that the Spurs have a very tangible bubbling up, it would be the Victor Wembanyama effect, wherein he basically his 2 days at Summer League sold out Summer League. And so it's a very real, oh, he's here. There's a very tangible stardom attached to him. And Bruno, just before we go anywhere else, I want to know, how excited are you to cover Victor Wembanyama?
Very excited. Yeah, as everyone is sort of in the contingency here. What a different 2 days that would have been for you. Kind of stark contrast between game one and game two for him. But that's all part of the Wemby effect. Is that there's just such a new lens. Over here in San Antonio, the whole bunch of a slew of national TV games to go to, and just this really interesting piece at the center of it, where you're going to watch this organization totally shift gears and now try and just build around this you know just limitless potential of a teenager coming in. So no, super exciting. It's hard to say otherwise, and just excited to get things going. Summer League was that first little taste of it, but now you kind of really want to see the process that's going to kind of go into effect with Wembanyama in the mix.
For myself, my Raptors fandom didn't start the moment I was born, so the Damon Stoudemire stuff doesn't really track for me. I came along more so in like the Jose Calderon era, started watching the games then. Were you watching and a fan of the Spurs when Tim Duncan came along at all?
Yeah, I was really thinking you're going to say Vince Carter there, not Jose Calderon, but that was a little twist there as the sentence unfolded. But yeah, so it's funny. I moved to San Antonio in 1996 or 97. I can't remember now. From Houston. So I was a Rockets fan in Houston
Mm,
through those title years, and so it's a little. It takes a little time, I think, as for most people to kind of shift, even as when you're a kid and you're a bit more malleable. So those early years, the fandom didn't immediately resonate. I'd say it took kind of through that, even through the first title. I was not particularly attached, and just as you grow, and I left San Antonio when I was still in high school, and went to college out of state. So as I think I was away, like the sort of connection to the town, like that fandom kind of was one of those ways to kind of retain that connection. So it was really through like the '05 title, and then moving forward that I can really felt like that I became more of a Spurs fan through the years. So yeah, definitely it was more of a life event thing than any particular player. Obviously the Spurs had that same core, for quite a while, so it wasn't necessarily that changed, but feeling that connection to the city.
yeah, dynastic in like every sense of the word, that era of the Spurs. And I kind of wanted to compare and contrast. Obviously, the Raptors had a chance at a dynasty, maybe, or what people might have kind of kicked around. Is this a dynasty? If Kawhi had stuck around, or maybe just a really, really powerful 2, 3 years. But currently, with Pascal Siakam in trade rumors, the team, whether people think they're going to surprise, the NBA this year with a better record, or whether they think it's not going to be that great. The truth of the matter is that Pascal Siakam has been discussed openly by the team as a trade option. DeJounte Murray was a guy who was in a similar position with the Spurs. The teams, while having different players, of course, and being built differently, uh, the Raptors arriving at a similar spot of like, this is our guy. We're going to try and trade him and get more of a youth movement coming in. What do you notice between the two, like the end of the DeJounte era and what might be the end of the Pascal era with the Raptors?
That's a funny parallel. I hadn't thought of that. But yeah, I can definitely see it. Both players, I think, Pascal, I think, is he entering his final year of the contract? Um,
Yes,
and so, similar to Dejounte, where the contract played into it for sure. The Spurs were not going to be able to extend him just given the way his previous contract was, and the money that he could have gotten off a new one. And I think they're a bit further along in knowing that it was time to hit the reset button than the Raptors have been. Maybe that's changing. Maybe that'll change as soon as
I
this
think that's
season.
accurate. Yeah,
Yeah, and so, similarities as far as becoming that inflection point of whether maybe this is like that you sometimes reach a point where something prompts you to make a decision, and it's that way to calibrate and look in the mirror and really decide, and maybe that's kind of the catalyst that might take place in Toronto, much like it did with the Spurs, and certainly for the Spurs, it was not only something that they benefited from shifting gears and actually winning the first overall pick, but they got a lot of assets in the process. So you hope that if that's the reality that the Raptors arrive to, that they're able to use that as part of the reset as well.
everybody has opinions from the outside. A lot of people, as the Spurs were trying to trade DeJounte, some people say, why would they trade him? He's really good. Some people say, oh, yeah, looking at that team, I understand why they're doing it. They need to go for this. What do you think about the Raptors' position with Pascal? What way do you lean?
I'm generally like a proven players over the unknown of assets kind of guy. Not only because you don't know what those assets are going to become, but because you can always turn good players into other players. And it's good to be good. It's good to be like competitive, and in the very least continue to build a winning culture. And especially if you like those guys in the locker room, there's just a lot of value there that goes beyond the sort of asset mines that really sort of permeate NBA analysis sometimes, where you have a lot of people that really jump to the blow it up philosophy when a team feels like it's not really turned that corner and gone from a 6 or 7 seed to a 2 or 3 seed. I feel like people jump the gun a little bit too early with that. We've seen a lot of teams that did not need to bottom out to hit that next level. They just kind of understood, what they had as far as a culture, as a process, and development as well. But not all teams are the same. So some teams maybe they don't have all of that in place. Maybe they do need a reset for other reasons. But in general, I like to keep a good player, and Pascal is, he's generally been seen as top 20, top 25 ish for a few seasons now. You like what he does on both ends of the floor. Um, there's always a question of whether he can be your best guy on a title team, but
Sure.
that when you actually go through that list, it's an extremely short list. So that should not necessarily be the criteria that defines whether you necessarily need to move on from a guy. So no, really like him. I think that a team could try to make it work around him, but sometimes doesn't always shake out that way as well. So got to be flexible one way on both sides.
It is interesting because I'm of the same mind as you, is that I do prefer proven NBA talent over draft equity, let's say. But the Raptors in the early 2010s, when they had their most success making trades, Masai Ujiri, chiefly among those trade decision makers, obviously Brian Colangelo brought Kyle Lowry in from Houston, which was a very big deal. But you see the Rudy Gay trade they made, which was just for a collection of, fledgling NBA talent, and then a few of those guys kind of popped off for the Raptors. But there was also the Grievous Vasquez trade for what ended up becoming Norman Powell and OG Anunoby through draft equity. And so that's like a home run trade, and you did it by giving a proven player who was, kind of on his way out of the league at that point, for draft equity. Andrea Bargnani ends up becoming the ninth overall pick. But now I think as far as like the style how they're building the team, the momentum of the team, obviously they are trying to trade Pascal Siakam for a package that they like. But I think that teams now are a lot more hesitant to give like that abundance of draft equity going back. Like, okay, a bunch of stuff because we don't have that much overhead about it, and we're they seem like really worried about how much draft capital they put into these trades and stuff like that. And so, and also I think Pascal Siakam, his standing within the league as far as like a trade chip exists lower than his impact as a player, and so that puts you in a very interesting spot as far as like, do you pull the trigger on a deal that isn't as sexy coming back because of A, it's a expiring deal. B, maybe that team thinks, Pascal, he's had a lot of possessions in Toronto, but maybe the impact is a little bit lesser than we thought once he's in, X or Y city. I don't think I agree with that, but that could be their thought process. And certainly things they would say to lower the price of a prospective deal. It's interesting, man. But as you said, like top 20, top 25 player for a few years. He's very good.
Yeah.
He's going to be in and around the All NBA conversation. Those guys, I want to say like they're not on the trade block that often, but it's the NBA. All NBA guys are on the trade block all the time now, which is kind of crazy to consider. But I guess I'll move us over to the Spurs. Victor Wembanyama, Devin Vassell. That's in my mind. Feel free to include anybody else you want, but like Devin Vassell, I think is somebody who very clearly has all-star, all NBA potential going forward. Obviously, Victor Wembanyama as well. Who else do you think should be considered as part of the Spurs core that fans should be keeping, I guess, tabs on from the outside?
Yeah, I agree that those are your first two you want to think about, and it's all an interesting conversation as we enter the season because we don't necessarily know who this starting five is going to be. Even like, not that it necessarily matters for starting, ushering in the Wemby era, but you'd think that there's generally like a default answer here. But there are six guys that the Spurs are probably trying to figure out as far as who are your top five, and they all provide like kind of a different flavor, and it's an interesting thing. But I think if you're starting to pencil in starters beyond Victor Wembanyama, Vassell should have one of those spots. And then it gets a little murky. You have kind of this remaining young core. Jeremy Sohan, obviously drafted the year before. Spurs are still extremely high on him. Started him from day one. Very uncommon in San Antonio for a rookie. Lots of upside, but still kind of we're not sure where his real scruples are. What are his strengths going to be when he becomes a fully rounded player? Like we've seen a little bit of everything, and that's really fun for a young player. A lot of talent, like defending at the point of attack as a guy that size. Again, something that we haven't seen Greg Popovich experiment with much up until last season, but he could do it. He held up very well, and it's really exciting to imagine Sohan defending at the point of attack and Wembanyama anchoring a defense. Devin Vassell playing
Mm-hmm.
the weak side, which is what he was exciting of a prospect as coming into the league as like that weak side player raising hell and using that length and anticipation. So I'm inclined to include Sohan in that mix. I think definitely as far as the young core, not necessarily a sure thing as that one of those five starters, but I think given what the team has invested in him, you add him to that list. The team still likes Keldon Johnson quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
He has obviously outperformed his draft position a million times over. Team has him on a contract that pretty much everyone would say is still team friendly. A bit of a drop off last season as a shooter, and I think he really has to prove that he can be that kind of have that as part of his arsenal. Just given that he's not uh, as much of an on ball creator and doesn't bring as much to the table as you'd like in a sort of guard wing. Um, Trey Jones is yet one of the other pieces there. Is
Yep.
that guy who re-signed as well. Another very team friendly deal, and somebody who the team has really been impressed by his development. Stepped into a starting role last season, and again, you assume he's probably going to continue to be that starting point guard, but you never know. So I think that's what this season is going to be all about. Is it's Victor, it's probably Devin, and then who.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what year one with Wemby is going to be is seeing what that who fits well with him, what archetypes fit well with him, um, who doesn't, and start to build around that kind of paradigm.
And I think they'll Popovich, I assume, will continue to use McDermott as like a big hub of the offense, and that will help sustain some of what they're doing. Just like he's so easy to run offense through with like the handoffs. It's McDermott. You can run any type of stuff on the perimeter. You're going to have stuff happen to move you through. You need to get through the sludge of a certain amount of like possessions during, a game. And maybe it will be the case that everything is like we have these burgeoning young players. They're going to figure it out for like 85% of the possessions. And then 10% goes to Doug because we want, a semblance of NBA offense, just like bam, bam, quick decisions using his gravity. And then the young players can also like cut and fill off of that. I think that, that had been the case. But I'm really interested to see what happens with that team because, as you say, like the guys you're listing off, there's not a lot of acclaim for these players league wide. And, even the guys who deserve to have like a ton of acclaim, Devin Vassell, I know you and I like it very quickly, like, oh yeah, he's a guy, but he's not even considered that. Like, consideration of him does not have any bearing on what he ends up being as a player, which will probably be all-star, all NBA level player. But like, people don't talk about Devin Vassell enough. He's as far as like having a pull up game, being one of the best nail defenders, having like, burgeoning playmaking stuff coming up, not being bad at the point of attack. It's like, and having, the height and length at his position. It's like, this is a very impressive young guy. And I wonder how high he can scale up. Deserves to be talked about, I guess, a little bit more often, certainly.
Yeah.
Kem Birch is still on the team.
Yep,
Keldon Johnson is a holdover of the Kawhi trade. He was the first round pick.
that's right.
We also have Malachi Branham. We have, is there anybody else left over from these trades? No. Okay, this is what I want to ask about. This is, I don't think it's going to be 3 years in a row, but if you're, the Spurs guy over there and you look at the Raptors roster and you say, hey, we should trade with the Raptors again because every year there seems to be a Raptors Spurs trade. 3 out of 5 years or 3 out of 6 years, 2 out of the last two, I think. When you look at the Raptors, who do you think is like a nice addition? Feel free to say Jakob Pertl if you like the Twin Towers thing.
Look, he was dark horse, maybe return guy this off season until he re upped with you guys for 3 years, 60. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Nice contract for Jakob. Let me peruse here because it's been a while since I've actually took a gander up and down the roster. But again, given the uncertainty that the Spurs are in, it's really still figuring out what are those archetypes that they can really start piecing uh, around Victor Wembanyama. So yeah, I don't necessarily know. Like look, no one's going to say no to OG Anunoby. But
Yeah.
apparently he costs about 10 first round picks and 10 pick swaps. So that might be a little bit even out of the Spurs price range given how many assets they've accrued. But like I think it's a fun question as far as what kind of five fit next to Wembanyama. And I neglected to mention Collins as far as like starters. He's almost certainly going to start at the five for the Spurs. But again, as far as the question of whether he's a long term piece, we don't know. But it's going to be what's that five given that Victor is feels at least like to start, he's going to be more of a four. And so, you can look at like a Koloko as somebody that, you might consider as just what kind of activity, what kind of like, geometry do you want around Victor to kind of plug the gaps and take the blows and just, fill in where he doesn't necessarily want to be. So I think something like that probably might make more sense. Somebody that's not necessarily going to cost an arm and a leg, but could be that right building block around Wembanyama to put him in the right position to succeed.
Well, even outside of the Raptors, we can step away from that now. Let's just talk about what you want the front court to look like. Do the wish casting. Victor Wembanyama is considered, the best prospect to come along since LeBron James. We already talked about the economics of how he's impacted the NBA thus far. He's a super big deal, He got Britney Spears into, a smidge of legal trouble. He's a big deal. People are aware of the, impending impact, or perhaps maybe the impending doom for the NBA if everything clicks for Victor Wembanyama properly. But what kind of big do you want him playing with? And especially considering the Spurs are the home of, like, Robinson and Duncan, the two towers.
Yeah, I don't. As far as what's optimal, that's what we're gonna see. So this is more like what's fun. And
Hmm.
so, that's like you think about both ends of the floor, and would I don't even know. Just trying to think of who some of the most like dominating offensive rebounders you have in the NBA are, but just somebody who can, along with Victor, put like just the kind of rim pressure on a defense that would just put coaches and opponents in hell for 48 minutes. Like that's something. So like imagining like a younger Steven Adams or something, where you're just like just bludgeoning them, and somebody who's also like a good physical complement to Victor. But you probably want somebody also who can stretch the floor. So a combination of that. Brooke Lopez was the type of name that we heard this offseason as that'd be nice. And look, somebody who's big, somebody who can, do stuff around the rim, but also like you actually scare teams enough to stretch them out and pull one of their proper rim protectors out. Like that's really fun. Um, at the same time, if Victor's going to be commanding a lot of attention, you want maybe some mobility at the five, like a cutter who can, really open things up with that activity as well. Do you want like somebody who's a good rim roller to where you can do some fun 4-5 pick and roll stuff? So there's really just so much. It's really so open ended right now, which is like both fun, but also there's like this user imagination gap. I feel like for him going into the year, where like you see like Scoot in Portland, and you can kind of like you get excited, but you also kind of know what it's going to be like, and it's fun, but it's also fairly tangible. But with Victor, it's like I don't even know. You don't know like how the Spurs are going to scheme with him defensively, because he's going to be guarding more fours. So does that mean teams are going to try and pull him away from the basket more? So what does that mean in terms of scheme and complementary players? So it's all really fun, and I'm not the right kind of basketball mind for this. I think you much more so are, and there's lots of other people that can think about the X's and O's a lot more than I can. But I'm just excited to kind of sit back and watch.
It was interesting that first game at Summer League how the Spurs just kind of they let the Spurs and Wembanyama let the crowd kind of get what they came for, which I thought was kind of nice because Wembanyama, despite being very, very talented at 7'4", is they didn't play to his strengths because the
Yeah,
crowd was cheering extremely loud every time he touched the ball, but it was like 45 extended, 23 feet away from the rim. As good as Wembanyama is and will be, he's not like a throw the ball, isolate against a defense from the perimeter that's keyed in on you. Like that's with
yeah. He's
Met,
not
that was
K. He's
the
not
case.
KD, not yet at least.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But that was the type of offense that he played. It was just kind of like, but I guess that's summer league too. It's like throw a guy a ball, see what he does with it. That's why combo guards always look like future MVPs at summer league, and then it tapers off more so once they get to the NBA. But I am so excited and interested to see, like how many pick and rolls does Wembenyama get a game on ball? How many
Yeah,
does he get off ball? How's his pacing? He should be the way that Anthony Davis has been for, what is it now? 12, 13 years. He should be now the preeminent, like, lob threat guy just because the vertical space he'll have, the range should outpace basically everybody almost in the history of the NBA. Like guys as tall as Victor don't jump like Victor. It's and they don't jump quickly like Victor, and then they don't shoot like him. And then I'm now listing why he was such a special prospect, obviously. But it's really interesting to consider what they might try and do. But man,
yeah.
yeah,
He
I
still
guess
breaks the mind a bit when you see
yeah.
him catch the ball 7 or 8 feet from the basket and turn it into like with his back to the basket and turn it into some sort of Wilt Chamberlain esque layup. Like it's the type of thing where your mind is not used to it. Just the way general physics works for most NBA players, and so yeah, the types of opportunities I think that he can open up is the type of thing that you imagine Pop, who doesn't get too giddy about most things, you think that would be pretty exciting to see what you can scheme for. But at the same time, I think that first game of summer league is what they're going to try to avoid. They don't want to overwhelm him and put him out of his depth and set him up to maybe be um, you know doing too much too soon. So it's going to be interesting how much the balance they strike between experimentation, but also letting him play to whatever those early strengths are.
It's even Victor, I think, is like a little bit restricted by, how do I play? Because you can
Yeah.
see like even the dimensions of the court sometimes are introduced him. Like when he's going for a reverse layup and he gets stuffed on the rim trying to go underneath, just doesn't happen to other people because you're not keeping the ball high enough to like when you're going under the rim, that's typically quite a comfortable situation for most people. But for him, he's like he gets caught and he's like, okay, I guess the ball comes lower than what It's just things like that, I suppose. To get back onto maybe a little bit more Raptor centric, the Raptors are a team that I had this big podcast with Evan Gualberto and Caitlin Cooper about probably one of the most unique offenses in the NBA. And I think it'll be a bottom five half court offense, but it will be unique in that, I'm sure you watch some of the World Cup. Dennis Schroeder, World Cup MVP. It isn't known yet whether he's starting on the Raptors or whether he's coming off of the bench. What is known, though, is that the Raptors have Jakob Pertl at the five, who just as well as anybody is not going to provide a lick of conventional spacing with shooting. There's some stuff he can do as a screener. His rolling, attracts tags from the weak side. There's different things he can do, but he's not going to shoot the ball. Pascal Siakam, power forward to power forward, shoots the ball fine, but he's not going to provide you with like a whole bunch of spacing. Of course, he does a bunch of other stuff great. Scottie Barnes is a guy at the three who, relative to other threes, there's not much spacing at all, provided he doesn't come back from summer with, all of a sudden, a jumper, which I don't expect to see. What do you make of a team trying to, in this day and age, this NBA, trying to make it work with as little shooting as the Raptors seemingly will have out there?
It's tough. This is coming from, again, a team that we covered not long ago that also had spacing issues, but managed to cobble a good offense. But that being the sort of DeMar LaMarcus Spurs of not too long ago, but it feels like it was 8 eons ago. That was different because you were speaking about players who at least had that mid range game, that 18-foot range, and were elite at that.
which
So
which Pascal does, but Jakob and Scottie aren't there at all, really.
exactly. So yeah, it's finding an identity around those strengths is I imagine the key. But at the same time, this being a team that is trying to not necessarily straddle two timelines, but develop Scottie, rebuild around Scottie while still putting out a competitive product. So how do you put Scottie, your seemingly franchise cornerstone moving forward, in the best position to become the best version of himself? Probably not playing around a couple of non-floor spacers, but it's where does the vision lean more towards? Is it finding the all around product, or is it really leaning into in and around Scottie? And maybe that's the same thing, but it'll be interesting. Yeah, and I think Pirtle being re-signed can be as much of a hub as he has been, as he was for the Spurs, as a in those dribble handoffs, as a screener. Like you said, he has his own version of spacing that provides, but that usually works when he's flanked by some other shooters as well, right?
Hmm.
So Gary Trent can be an important cog in that as well, and it's going to be how much can you squeeze out of that, and get Scottie going downhill, and Pascal spinning his way to the basket. And um, yeah, I can see it being a bit of a challenge, but if the defense clicks, if they can get out in transition enough, you can still see a competitive product coming out of it.
I do think that's going to be the formula for sure. And the defense just sitting there, and this has been kind of the conversation I've had with most people about the Raptors is they have to lead with defense. They have to get out in transition. What do you think their defensive floor is? And we'll go by, in your mind, defensive rating and then ranked in the league. Like you don't have to pick the defensive rating, what the numbers will be, but you know, ordered by defensive rating, where do you think they'll rank in the league this upcoming season?
Oh, where did they rank last year?
Last year,
Yeah,
outside of the top 10, maybe 15th. They came on strong at the end of the season, but they were very, very bad in the middle, and obviously Jakob's addition is what made it a lot more, I guess, tenable for them
yeah,
to kind of succeed on defense.
yeah. No, I mean, I always loved what Jakob brought. The just became a real two-way force. But as a rim protector on defense, really could anchor it. And when you put that length around him, I think you've really got something. And you mentioned Schroeder, like whether or not he's going to start, and I think that could be a real swing factor as far as your
Hmm.
defensive rating, right? Because he could really tilt things in the right way offensively. Be that one of that straw that stirs the drink. Um, and you could see him clicking with Jakob and helping potentially set up Scottie the right way. And if you can bring FIBA Schroeder, all the better. But yeah, I mean, I think off the cuff, somewhere along where they have been makes with a bit of upside with Scottie. Players like him should just keep getting better with those tools. Um, and at his age, is he still 21?
Yeah,
I don't know.
or I think he
So
just maybe turned 22,
yeah,
but
either way,
yeah.
just should just keep getting better. I think top 10 upside, but top 15 feels safe. Off just again speaking off the cuff with very limited familiarity with the team.
I think from my point of view, maybe there's some homerism. I do my best to avoid homerism, but I think there's like they could be as high as like 5, 6, and I wouldn't expect to see them outside of the top 12. And then, but even so, that doesn't guarantee them a playoff spot or anything like that. But I think that the defense, if you like getting stops, which is harder and harder to do in the NBA now, then the Raptors will be a pretty fun and entertaining watch. I do want to just get before we get out of here. We kind of got the whole thoughts you had on Pascal Siakam early, but everybody wants to know what people think of Scottie Barnes and what are your. I think the dialogue switched on Scottie from Rookie of the Year to I think the current view of him for most NBA fans is that he stagnated, big time sophomore slump. And I won't give you my thoughts on it, but I'm curious what you think about year two for Scottie and then heading into the future.
Again, caught some games with Scotty for sure, and some games with the Raptors. So this is with much more of a limited exposure than you and your listeners. But players like him don't come around very often for a reason. Those big wings that can um, do a little bit of something with the ball and still, with it seems like 7 foot plus wingspan, really good body, um, just rookie of the year. Like I mean, I'd still be very high on him. These sometimes these things are non-linear as far as what the output is like, and when the floor already feels there, but it's just one of those things where if things click a little bit more with what he can do, on ball, if the jumper improves at all, then the conversation just changes so quickly, right? Like if we start seeing him just even off the catch, just become more of a viable threat. But what that means for attacking closeouts and forcing defenses to actually adjust. So no, I mean I'd still be extremely high on him. That's such a those found money when the Raptors were able to draft him. I think turning on a guy in year two is typically bad practice, especially one with comes in with as much cachet as he did after his rookie season.
Yeah. 15.3 points, 6.6 boards, 4.8 assists, and quietly won a lot more minutes on the floor in year two than he did in year one. Super big deal. Dealt with a couple injuries. I'm excited to see what it looks like. I'm not a huge vote of confidence of Scottie running point guard year three, but if it does happen, I hope the best comes about it, and I hope that really good things happen for these Raptors. If the team performs well, given the personnel on the roster, it means they're playing really unique basketball. And good unique basketball is one of the coolest things, and it's kind of what the NBA is all about. Bruno, any parting shots before we get out of here?
Oh, no, it's just I've always had a real affinity for the Raptors. Enjoy watching them for a lot of the reasons that you said, as far as going leaning into unique, um, uh, and you know they've got a real liking for the kind of players that I like, and um, the style of basketball. And I like a puzzle, and a team trying to figure it out, not necessarily immediately blowing it up. And I appreciate the Raptors at least giving that a go this year. And no, it'll be really exciting to watch. Obviously, the Spurs are going to be fun, so looking forward to that on this end. And yeah, looking forward to whatever the 2023-24 Raptors inevitable Raptors Spurs trade is going to be, because
Yeah.
they've done some good collabs, and uh, shouldn't stop now.
As far as other things go, I think we talk about unique basketball, trying to pay attention to, what's interesting around the league. The Raptors playing a style that you enjoy or employing players that you like, i.e., you're more interested. For anybody who wants to pay attention to these very unique and interesting Spurs, helmed by Victor Wembanyama's stardom, Pounding the Rock, SB Nation Spurs site, Bruno Passos. If you want to pay attention to what they're doing this year, I think that's a great place to start. And hopefully it's good enough that that's where you finish. That's the spot you go. You're like, where's my Wembanyama news? How is that looking? And I guess that's where you end up. Bruno, anything you want to say before we get out of here?
No, no, appreciate it. Yes, Spurs coverage will obviously be a little bit, you know, more widely covered this year than years past. But yeah, you can find my stuff at Pounding the Rock. But no, otherwise, looking forward to the Spurs season. Looking forward to the Raptors season as well. Fun team to stay connected to. Obviously, not just for your listenership, but in general, just a really good team. Love that they're sticking to the process, trying to crack this egg with this unique and fun bunch, and hoping they turn the corner this year for sure.
Hell yeah. Bruno, thank you so much for coming on. Listener, thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, lots more of these to come. A few in the rearview window, and that's about it. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see ya.